popular theories about the resurrection of Jesus. But when you take any one of those popular theories and you try to apply it to all the facts that we're about to talk about, it just doesn't work. It doesn't answer all the facts. It may answer one of them, two of them, or even three of them, but it doesn't answer all the facts. The only thing that makes sense in answering all the facts is that Jesus was actually raised from the dead. Okay, so this actually comes from, I was doing a little bit more research on this, trying to figure out, back up in my own thinking, where this originated. And I had mentioned the name Gary Habermas. I've got some videos and stuff that he's done, and even a couple of articles. But I went back and learned that Gary partnered or co-authored with actually a guy that was a student of his, whose name is Michael Licona. And let's see. I'll try to put this up here in smaller. Do what?
Why do you know that name?
I don't know if I know that name, but it sounds familiar.
I know, that's what I'm thinking too. Daddy, why would you know that name?
Well, I mean, he has written several things, especially related to evidences. These are the two authors, and the book that they wrote is called A Case for the Resurrection. And in this book, they outline, I'm sorry, not a case, but the case. I'll put my notes again. They outline this approach, and they cite in this book atheists and those that profess to be agnostics. They cite either books or articles or public addresses, speeches that they made, in which they do not deny any of these things. Now, what happens, to be clear, as you're thinking through this, is that when these atheists or agnostics are not denying some of these things, there are two things that they do not do. They do not pull them all together collectively. Because if they did that, you have this bigger picture that starts to emerge that they don't want people to be thinking about, or maybe they themselves don't even see. Secondly, they don't want to bring them all together and try to take the more popular theories, even the theory that they themselves are a promoter of, and apply it to all of these minimal facts. What they will wind up doing is they will take one or two or three of the facts and try to show how their preferred theory of what happened, how that answers these facts, but they don't look at all the facts. If they did that, then again they would be forced to say, well, this theory doesn't actually address this particular fact. Or when we look at the big picture as a whole, the only thing that makes sense is the actual resurrection. They're not going to go there, and so they're going to make it look pretty for themselves. And again, some of them, I think, honestly, probably have never done this exercise. Some of them have done this exercise, and simply are going to say, I don't care what you say, there's no way I'm going to believe in the resurrection, period. And so they're just going to be stuck in their stubbornness. But we started the outline. I've erased the fourth one, because I had pulled that up from another article by Gary Habermas. And in this book, they actually outline multiple facts. I forget exactly how many now. I want to say at least 10 or 12 facts, maybe even as many as like 15. And some of these facts are like smaller facts that, for example, I have grouped together here under transformed disciples. So we mentioned, in addition to Saul of Tarsus, do you remember the other one that we mentioned last week?
James, the brother of Jesus.
James, the brother of Jesus. So he was one who did not believe in Jesus. He even mocked Jesus and thought he was losing his mind, according to several passages. But yet James becomes the leader, ultimately, of the church in Jerusalem. One of the most respected elders and preachers and teachers among the church in Jerusalem. So he had a major transformation. And there is actually extra biblical information about this. We see in Josephus' writings. Josephus, for those who aren't familiar with him, was a Roman historian that lived in the first century. And in the latter part of the first century, so he's actually younger than Saul was by a few years, a few decades. I mean, but he would have been born in the lifetime of Saul. And he was a Jewish leader of some sort. I forget now what his position was. But when the Romans came in the late 60s and started kind of taking over more places in Jerusalem or in Palestine area, and ultimately destroyed the temple in AD 70, Josephus jumped ship. He became a traitor to the Jewish people and joined the Romans and basically became their what do you call it? Like when you go on you say you visit some museum, or he became their tour guide. Is what they're looking for. He became the Romans tour guide, and as a part of that, he actually started living a pretty good life from a financial standpoint and from his connections and all of that. But in order to keep some of that up, he actually wrote several books. And his longer book is a multi-volume book about the history of the Jewish people. And he wrote this for the Romans so that they would know and understand the history of the Jewish people. And in that particular writing, and I think in one of his other writings as well, he mentions James, the brother of Jesus, and talks about how well known he was. And that when he wound up being killed, which is not recorded in the biblical text, but when he wound up being killed, all of Jerusalem, not just the followers of Christ, but all of Jerusalem mourned for his passing, because he was such a, he actually tried to start living like his oldest half-brother Jesus, and was so compassionate and so loving and so giving for the whole community that, again, the whole city mourned his passing. But here's the deal. Here's why Habermas does not include this one now. First of all, as a general principle, it's difficult to try to learn 12 or 15 different things. And it almost comes across as if you're taking this shotgun approach, like bam, 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 bam. I'm going to hit you with all of these things, and therefore, because there are so many of them, you have to believe. Okay? We don't want to do that to anybody. And so we're going to number this down to just some bare, minimal facts. Okay, so that's one of the reasons. But as we're eliminating some of these, we don't want to eliminate the best ones, or the ones that are the most obvious, or the ones that are the most talked about. So very few people, very few atheists, very few agnostics will engage in the discussion about James. They just don't. And since they don't, whilst a few of them do, but since they don't engage with him, it's not as powerful for us to actually say, oh, well, James, brother of Jesus, he was transformed, and all the atheists and agnostics believe it, because you can't quote them. You can't cite where they would identify this as being a reality. It's not that they disbelieve it, they just don't talk about it. And so we want to stick with some of the best ones. So I'm actually going to post in the Google Classroom an article, which is, I think the way, this is by Matt Bassford, and I think the way Matt used to do this is he wrote out his sermons in manuscript form before he preached them, and then he posted that pre-sermon, that pre-delivery manuscript as like an article, but he actually wrote it like he was going to be preaching it. I don't think this was an actual transcription of the way he actually preached it, but the way that he prepared to preach it. And so he actually uses the ones that I have used in my sermons and notes before. So number one, and he has 5 of them, by the way. Number one is that Jesus died on the cross. And I like this word crucifixion because this is how Jesus died. This is a part of this discussion. So it's not just that Jesus died, like people beat him up or something, or somebody shot him. No, this was a specially designed method of killing people that the Romans had perfected. They knew how to kill people. And you can look back through all of Roman history. There have been 2 or 3 people that have survived crucifixion, but the reason they survived it, when you look at the context, because this is an argument that sometimes atheists and agnostics will actually make. Well, people do survive crucifixion. Well, no, actually they don't. So what happens even in these 2 or 3 cases is that one guy survived for like 2 or 3 days and then he died. I mean, just the stuff that the crucifixion did to his body, he just couldn't overcome that. So he did die, just not on a cross. He was taken down from the cross and died within a short time later because of what had happened. One of the other examples of that, when you look at the context, he was taken down from the cross very early on in the process. And so as a result, no, he didn't go through the entire crucifixion process, and so he survived crucifixion. Outside of a couple of examples like that, no one has ever survived crucifixion. So that's an important detail. So number one, Jesus died on the cross, or Jesus died by crucifixion. And you can find lots of atheists, lots of agnostics that are willing to acknowledge that that is the case. Okay, number two is the early disciples believed they had seen Jesus. And this is important because of multiple things. Number one, the number of people who saw him. We're talking, Paul mentions over 500 brethren at one time saw him. And this is 1 Corinthians chapter 15 in the first 9 verses or so. But in addition to these 500, he mentions other occasions. So not only do you have a large number, but you have a large number of actual sightings over a 40-day period. So it wasn't just one location and a group of people saw just in that one location, that one time, and that's it. But you had someone over here, a group over here, a group over there, up in Galilee, down in Jerusalem, up on this mountain over here. All of these different things spread out. And again, we find that many disciples believe that, and the atheists and agnostics, they have to acknowledge that that's reality. Donald first.
John writes that everything he had seen and witnessed cannot even be written in this book. Even just that, the many things that Jesus did that we don't even know about.
Yeah.
Many people could have seen that, and that just multiplies the number.
That's a really good point.
That's really cool to think about. That actually a lot of people saw Jesus.
Yeah.
Probably several thousand, even a couple million people saw
Yeah. Now, as far as in his life, yes. As far as after the resurrection during that 40-day period,
right.
It's going to be several hundred. Over 500 people for sure. And a part of John's point has to do with the whole life of Jesus. But I want you to think about this, because this is important too, especially if we're talking with people who are like, did Jesus actually live? Was he a real person? Did he actually perform miracles? Those are good questions. How long was Jesus' public ministry? I may want to crack the door. It's a little hot in here.
He's struggling some.
Yeah.
What was that before?
She started to get up and open the door, which was fine, if that's what you wanted to do.
Oh, well, I don't know, because then Aaron looked at Jacob weird, and I was thought we were
Jacob's not
joking.
welcome.
Yeah, Jacob's not gonna have us look at
Oh, okay, I was like,
I'll get the
Thank you.
door.
sorry, I didn't know if y'all were joking, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do it, because y'all laugh if I open the door. So,
No, we're just making fun of Jacob.
I might laugh with you, but I will laugh at you.
that's not true.
I'll laugh at you.
All right, so how many years, or how long was Jesus' public ministry?
3 years.
All right, 3 to 3.5 years. So we'll just say 3 to 3.5 years. Out of that 3 to 3.5 years, yes, ma'am.
Well, I just want to point on the first one that not everybody died actually on the cross, and the Romans knew that, and we even see that with Jesus. They would break their legs so that even
Sure.
if they didn't die, they couldn't go anywhere because eventually they would die, or they would pierce them in the side to make sure that.
Well,
they were
the
dead.
reason they broke their legs wasn't so they couldn't get away. They were already nailed to the cross, so they couldn't get away anyway.
No, but after
But-
they were taken.
No, that still wasn't the reason. The reason they broke their legs is because it prevented them from being able to stand. And so basically, once they broke their legs,
Yeah.
they their lungs essentially just kind of collapsed.
I have heard that, but
Yeah.
low-key this whole time.
That was
I
really
so
my
they couldn't get away.
understanding.
No, so some of
They're not going anywhere.
It works either way.
Some of the crucifixions, which there are tens of thousands of crucifixions that happen throughout history, but some of them, they would have a little piece of wood that the foot could actually rest on, so you could push up and open your lungs up to be able to actually breathe. That was not because they were being gracious. That actually just prolonged the whole process and made it that much more painful. I mean, you were struggling this whole time because you were, by instinct, trying to just breathe and to do what you could. You would actually push up on that. But even when they didn't have the small piece of wood, I mean, you're still trying to grasp, I mean, maybe pushing up where you've been nailed to, maybe even just trying to grasp your feet around the actual wood and just do whatever you could to try to push yourself up. And so when they broke the legs, yeah, you had no way to push yourself up. And so your lungs basically could not be open so that you could bring air in. And yeah, I mean, you either suffocated or your lungs started to fill up with fluid and it's a type of drowning, I forget what they call it now. But yeah, that would actually happen to you. So that was a part of the crucifixion process if it was taking too long. Because they didn't want to bring in like the midnight shift and have to watch these people and make sure nobody came and took them down from the cross. They wanted them dead by the time so they could go home and eat supper. And so they would break their legs to make it happen quicker. Or, like Julianne said, if they thought somebody was dead but they weren't sure because maybe it happened faster than what they were planning or whatever, then yeah, they would stab them.
But that was after he was already off the cross, right?
No.
Or,
That was a little bit.
No, Jesus was stabbed while he was up on the cross.
seriously?
And
Since when?
the legs of
Since it happened.
the guys that were crucified with him, they were broken while they were still on the cross. Yeah. All right. Getting back to this point here. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have another?
Well, after you discuss like Darwin's point, we can,
Okay.
that's what this,
Don't forget.
I've been trying not to.
All right. So 3 to 3.5 years. So we're talking about how many days, roughly?
Oh.
1,000.
1,000 to 1,200.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roughly.
1,300
Okay.
range.
Yeah. Now, how many days of Jesus' life is there a part of that day even touched on in the Gospels?
40.
Yeah, 40. At least by one guy's count, he went through the Gospels. His name was J.W.
Wait, we
Um,
only have 40
McGarvey.
days.
Yeah.
Only 40 days of the
His
life
whole
of
life.
Jesus are actually talked about within
40.
That's crazy. That's
It's
crazy.
never like an actual
Of his
full day.
public?
I've done his life.
Isn't it never like an actual full day?
one full day.
Oh, yeah.
When? Which day?
It was called the Long Day.
Makes sense.
It's where he actually left early in the morning and was praying and was trying to get away. But then he started healing people, he started talking to people, and then he wound up even praying through the night, the next night. So he was awake for like 24 hours, and there are several things about that time period that are actually talked about. Yeah.
That's cool.
Do they ever like discuss Jesus's like childhood?
Okay, in the Gospels, there are only 2 things related to Jesus' childhood that are actually discussed. The first is his birth, and that's in Matthew and Luke. So Mark and John don't even talk about Jesus' birth. The second thing that is talked about is when Jesus went to the temple at the age of 12, and that's talked about it in Luke chapter 2, and only in Luke chapter 2. It's not even talked about in any of the other Gospels. So Jesus' birth, and actually Luke even mentions when he was 8 days old, because according to the law of Moses, they were circumcised on the 8th day. Vitamin K levels are the highest naturally on that particular day. One of those scientific kind of connections to God's law. And vitamin K, by the way, is a clotting vitamin, so you don't bleed. So yeah, his birth he was 8 days old, and then when he was 12 years old, his parents had made a trip to the temple. In the gospel text, that's all that's actually talked about. Until he was about 30 years old. And he started his public ministry. And then we had 40 days, and so that's it. But, I mean, outside of those 40 days, with these 1,000+ days, yes, there are tons of things that he said, tons of things that he did that millions of people would have witnessed, during all of that.
It's crazy how we only have 40 days and we have, this is a lot. Just
Yeah.
that we say that Jesus did.
He's
Like,
busy.
that's
He was
so
busy.
much.
Think about the
Yeah.
past month of your life.
Yeah, and we have so much
Yeah.
faith on those 40 days.
All right, Evan, what was your
Okay, another thing with like the people believing is like, didn't he direct name drop? So it's like, it was people that were still alive. So it's like, people could go fact check his letters and like, ask different people, like, did you see Jesus
Yeah.
or not?
No, absolutely. Paul did that. And actually, I think that's one of his primary points in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is like, listen, I'm not making this stuff up. You can go, you can ask, there'll be hundreds of people lining up. A few of them have already died. There are still hundreds of people who saw him raised from or after he was dead in all kinds of different locations over that 40-day period. And the 40-day period, by the way, not to be confused with the 40 days of his life, but after he was raised from the dead, he ascended 10 days before Pentecost. And Pentecost means 50 days. So 50 days after the Passover.
It was only 10 days.
Yeah.
I've always thought that they were just like sitting around for like a month.
No. And technically, it may have only been like 7 days, because Pentecost is 50 days from the Passover. Or it's 50 days from no, I take that back. Pentecost is 50 days after the Saturday of Passover week. So yes, it was still 40 days. Yes. Julianne, I think that you have your hand. Okay.
So, do we know what day Passover is on?
Yes, it depends on exactly which year he was crucified.
Okay.
This is a much more involved discussion, and I'm hoping to actually pull up some information. I promised some guys that on an email list that I'm on, because they sent something about the chronology of Jesus' life. And one of our major dates for dating first century stuff is based on some dates in Josephus. But from what I understand right now, I think there are people who are pushing back on this. But there was a guy back in the 90s who basically tried to go back and look at all the extant manuscripts, the handwritten copies of Josephus' work. And he said, guys, we missed it. There was a misprint in the 1500s that became the basis for all Western language editions of Josephus. And so for over 500 years, the date has been wrong. And if you look at all of the extant manuscripts, that moves the death of Herod. That was the whole dating process. It moves the death of Herod. So either the year 30 or the year 33. And it depends on which year Jesus was actually crucified as to what they happen to be on. I personally lean toward the AD 30, which would have been April the 7th.
Wait, so
Let me say it.
I'm sorry.
when is Easter?
When is Easter?
Yeah.
Well, it changes every year, so.
So Easter always is going to fall on a Sunday. And so, yes, it moves.
April?
Yes,
I think it's in
but
April this
it's
year.
based
No, it's not. It's
on
March. It's like the
based
last
on an
week of
older
March.
calendar, and especially if you follow the Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar was a quasi-lunar calendar. It doesn't fit our exact solar calendar today, and so it can be anywhere from the last Sunday in March to like the first Sunday in May, I think.
So they're pretty close.
Oh yeah. Oh no,
Well,
absolutely.
I mean, Easter has actually fallen on like April 7th before, but it has to be on a Sunday, because like Easter Sunday, but that doesn't make any sense, because if it's the same date, then it would be the same day every year, so I don't know why we changed it. This is a pet peeve of mine.
Well, that's a whole other discussion. We may have time to get to that at some point, and I'll try to remember if I find this information for these other guys. I'll try to post it into the Google Classroom. All right. So the disciples believed. Many of them, many places they had seen Jesus. That is number 2. Number 3, in Matt's list is James, but again, I just watched a video recently by Gary, and he mentions why they don't specifically talk about James, because there's just not that many people engaging with that. But the 4th one then in Matt's list, and number 3 here, is Saul of Tarsus. Saul had such a huge impact on 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe, that it's undeniable who he was. And then with the information that we have, the fact that he had been a persecutor of the church, and then he was transformed, it's a huge deal. And the 4th thing, and the one that I forget exactly what I said last time. I'm having to read it. I don't remember what it says. But that is the empty tomb. To me, this is just the easiest way to remember this.
That's
So,
not what you had on there last time.
what's that?
That's not what you said last time.
What did I say last time?
Early proclamations.
Okay, so on my list, I actually do come back to that. But I was hesitant last time because I knew the empty tomb was a big deal. And I didn't know why Gary's one list that I had did not include that. But I think it needs to be included in their book. It is one of the primary ones. I don't know, Gary just forgot it the day he did that video or what. He's very much impromptu as he's speaking. But the spread of the early church, to me, is a huge deal about Christianity. But that's just about Christianity. When we think about Jesus and him being resurrected, again, no atheist, agnostic denies Jesus actually died by crucifixion. There are a few people who try to deny that. Like I said, the whole swoon theory, but that's not that popular. It did have a little bit of a resurrection, no pun intended, or I guess maybe pun intended, within the last century, but it's dying off again. Number two, the disciples believed they had seen Jesus, many of them in many locations. People don't deny that. That's exactly what would happen. Number three, you had the transformed disciples, especially Saul of Tarsus, from Christian killer to Christian preacher. And number four, the empty tomb. Again, there are different theories, and this is what I was talking about earlier, different theories to try to explain this. Well, the disciples stole the body. Well, if the disciples stole the body, why would they be transformed? Or why would they claim to have believed in Jesus even to the point of their death? And that's where these get a little bit more nuanced, that they were willing to die for this declaration. You don't steal a body and then be willing to die to try to keep that hidden from everybody. So that doesn't really work. That's not psychologically viable. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing is, oh, well, they forgot where they placed the body. It doesn't work for multiple reasons. One, there are so many witnesses about where they buried them. Number two, eventually they would have found the right tomb. I mean, it doesn't take very, very long. So again, they have all these different theories, but when you take these four primary things here, say what is the best explanation that accounts for all of these things? Again, the only thing that accounts for all of this and all of the implications of this is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so because Jesus was raised, we can believe in Jesus. Now, we're going to go somewhere with that. I don't know if we'll have time today. We have about 4 minutes left. But does this make sense? Is this something that you feel would be helpful or useful in talking with your atheist or agnostic friends?
1 in 3, yes. 2, no.
Okay, why not 2?
Well, just it doesn't actually deal with anything like super factual in my opinion. Because I mean, lots of people believe lots of things. I mean, in 2020, we had a whole bunch of people who believed that Trump was the rightful president of the United States, and were willing to go to great lengths to prove that. And they stormed the Capitol to prove that, basically. But that doesn't make it right necessarily. So just because they believe something, it doesn't make it true or right. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, but the parallel to that
Okay.
would be that all of these people saw the ballots, or they counted the ballots, and they knew that Trump had more ballots than Biden did. Because here's the situation: not just they, let me try this again. Not just that they thought Jesus had been raised from the dead; they actually saw him after the fact. So they saw the very fact that is being talked about. Most of these people did not see anything about Trump actually being elected. That's just what they wanted, and they believed that was the case, but they didn't actually have any evidence whatsoever in front of them that would back up that belief.
Yeah. So maybe I would say instead of disciples believed, is that disciples saw Jesus.
I like that.
And I mean, that even makes it even shorter as well.
Yeah.
Short and sweet.
I think the reason they say believe is using the language of the skeptics.
Yeah.
I think Evan was next.
Yeah, another thing is like the fact they wrote the books, that they're like the Gospels so early and had confidence in that is kind of bold as well. And like
Yeah.
just different things they use, like the way they use, there's a lot of things that go into how strongly they believe about the reason they had women to be like the first witnesses is huge, because that's against the social norm. And it's like that kind of stuff, if you use that, they wouldn't go to those lengths unless they truly believed and saw him.
Yeah, no, there are all kinds of nuanced things related to this point here. And even to Jacob's point, that people believe so many things. Okay, there are scientists who study hallucinations and what happens with hallucinations. Yeah, this doesn't fit.
Sure.
None of the criteria by which we identify people, including a large group of a few hundred people seeking something, this goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
And so this does not fit any criteria by which we know about people hallucinating, which again is one of the theories. Well, that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I was trying to say one thing too. Like, I've always kind of struggled with this as well, because like the psychological processes that people can go through, and I mean, the lies that people can actually believe, and like, I mean, it's crazy what people will do and the lengths that they'll go to for things that they believe. But I think like my thing is how many people it was. Like, if it was fake, if nobody did see them, or even if like one of the apostles came back and was like, oh, I saw him, and the other 12 believed, if we only had 12, 13, 14 people, maybe I could see, like, yeah, they had their own little group going on, so like they were gonna believe Peter, who came back and said he saw Jesus, whatever, no big deal. But like having hundreds of people that were willing to go to those lengths, you can't fake that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody somewhere would be like,
Oh yeah.
no, this is completely
Exactly.
fake, or this is not true. Like, people would start dissolving if it wasn't real.
And like to Evan's point, them putting this in writing and dispersing it, people, if it was not true, they could disprove it. If they had the body, then they would present it. If they had ways to discredit people and what they saw, then they would do that. But there's zero record of anybody in the entire Roman Empire making any attempt to do away with any of this. None of it whatsoever. All right, Jacob, real quick. Then I've got announcements tonight.
So I don't know. I don't like the strength of belief as an argument for this. I'm not saying it's a bad argument. I just don't feel like no 2.
Okay.
And like what Evan said with like how strongly they believe. I know, but just like I don't feel like that's a very good argument. It's not necessarily a bad argument.
Well, it's not about the belief. It's the number of people, the number of
That
places.
still doesn't really change it though. Because I mean, like, there were hundreds of thousands, well, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but there were thousands of Nazis who believed they needed to exterminate all the Jews. And they went to great lengths to do that. Does that make that okay? Or does that
Well,
prove
that's-
No, but that
their
is
reason?
real.
That's not a
We're not proving that's
supernatural
okay.
event.
Sure, no.
Like you don't have thousands of Nazis that's saying we saw Hitler hatch out of an egg.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing like that. So you have to make comparisons that are actually dealing with the primary points of comparison.
Sure, but there are no real comparisons in the known world to this event. And so I feel like...
There actually are.
To be fair,
There have been several resurrection claims over the years. And this is how Bart Ehrman
Yeah.
begins his classes, is he actually starts giving you some information where he convolutes other resurrection claims
Yeah.
from around the time of Jesus. But what happens is those claims break down for multiple reasons. They don't have the criteria
Sure.
that these have. So you do have cases where people claim to have someone resurrected from the dead.
Yeah.
But when you investigate, what are the facts? What are the evidences? None of those things have anything remotely close
And I mean, I'm not saying that
to
like,
Jesus.
I mean, there's so many other evidences. I'm just saying out of all of the ones we've listed, I think 2 is the weakest.
Sure.
I understand.
So.
I can see that.